All right. Very good late afternoon to all of you, both here in Otaniemi and online. We're in October already, and I get to wish you welcome to this fall's first Better Business, Better Society seminar. We had the Jaakko Honko lecture in September, and now it's time to get back to our regular programming. We will have quite a few of these before Christmas comes, so you have a lot of interesting program to look forward to this fall. As tradition has it, I'll give you a brief update on what's going on at the School of Business, and then we get the stars of tonight loose here. So we've been talking quite a bit about growth. This might be a repeat to some of you as you've heard this message from me before, but we have all read about or heard about the Ministry of Education and Culture push for 50% higher education in Finnish cohorts by 2030. We also heard recently that we might not, as a nation, quite not be on that track. We've losing already some of the speed, but at Aalto we have done our share of it. And here's some of the growth that we have seen since 2019. We've actually, if we look at the whole bachelor program intake for School of Business, we've grown from 464 to 585. So you're talking quite significant growth. And how it looks like, these numbers are actually from only the part that comes through the common application to our Finnish bachelor program. But the blue pillars there show that indeed there is a big uptick. We kind of feel like we have now done our growth, and we continue to focus on making sure that we stay at the very high quality, not wanting to jeopardize any of that. Despite this growth in numbers, we have maintained very high quality in terms of the incoming cohorts. I put in there in the same graph the points that are required from the matriculation exam points in order to come in. And again, despite the growth, the graph is quite level. A little bit of bragging maybe. I also wanted to put who's the second toughest to get into amongst business schools. And again, I also extended the scale a little bit to make it as good as possible for our school, I admit. But the point is, we are quite selective in our student intake, and it shows on everything we do here at school. Of course, our students are also placing themselves very well in the job market. So we are in a very fortunate situation to be an attractive target. What we do in terms of making sure about that last point, employment, is that we do keep a very close eye on the companies, and we'd love to hear your feedback also on what type of skills are needed for learners in the future. And we update our program portfolio every once in a while. That's actually one of the topics of tonight, as well as we are going to be talking about entrepreneurship and especially sustainable entrepreneurship. And we will have a new master's program opening in that area with first intake next summer. Another piece of good news from School of Business, we have the 3 major international business accreditations. We talk quite often about it. What do they mean? These accreditations, in essence, they make sure that we do what we say we do. They're all based on our strategy, and we have the peer review teams come in and they read through our strategy, and then they interview. We report on what we do, and they interview us just to make sure that indeed we are honest to our strategy and mission, and also that we meet the quality standards that they set for. And the latest one of those logos we actually received last week. So late last spring we had the Equus peer review team here on campus, and now we got the final decision, and it was actually overflowingly positive feedback. It was quite humbling to read what they thought about our school. So you alums have a lot of things to be proud of. Lastly, I also want to remind you, you may have received some information, the alums amongst you, about the Alumni Weekend, which is scheduled for Saturday, October 28th here in Otaniemi. I hear there's about 800 registered participants already, but the goal is that we have about 1,000 people here. So if you haven't registered yet, please look it up, and I'd love to see as many of you as possible. Without further ado, I'll pass the microphone over, or the word over, to Ewald Kibler, our professor who will be running today's show and the panel. So Ewald, please.
Great. All right. Thank you, Timo, for the nice opening of the today's seminar. I'm happy to welcome everyone to the Better Business, Better Society seminar that I'm organizing. It's a privilege, so also thanks for the invitation to do this. We were thinking a lot about the topic. I mean, my area is entrepreneurship, but I also felt it's a wonderful opportunity to share some insights from my own work as a starting point to set the scene, also a bit of then for a more deeper panel discussion. I also want really to have time for audience questions online and also in class. So we'll try to make sure that you also get your words. And it's great to see many familiar faces also here. Lots of new faces, nice diverse group. So welcome everyone again. The topic for today, how can entrepreneurship enhance quality of life in an aging society? It's quite a broad question. I think it's a very big question. It also reflects one of the grand challenges in our today's society. And there are lots of angles and takes on how to address that question. And I think that's why also I try first to give some insights, but then we will broaden it up also together with our experts that will join the panel to address the question from many different angles. Also would like to say for me personally, it's also a great moment at this event, to use this event to also share insights from my research that was really funded for almost 6-7 years by the Academy of Finland. So also big thanks to the Academy of Finland that specifically focused my research on late career entrepreneurship and aging and quality of life and well-being more generally. So I think I'll zoom into concrete takeaways from my research that I've done in the past 10 years around that topic. And based on that insights, I will lay out a few themes, a few building blocks that we then maybe can use really to zoom into real-life practical insights, where we then also have the pleasure to have experts with us, but I also would like the audience to get involved and to share also your reflections and to raise questions to encourage a more deeper discussion. I also would like to obviously say thanks for the experts joining today. Elisa Kitunen, Head of Moven EEX, with long experience in also mentoring and training entrepreneurs, younger, older generations. I think there is a nice angle to take on our major questions. Also Sandra Lounamaa, welcome, co-founder and CEO of Gubbe, which is a startup, offers innovative solutions in improving healthcare services targeted at the elderly population. Thanks for coming and joining. Lauri Ratia and also Markus Raivio were supposed to join also online. Online participation we felt is difficult to maintain also because we want to have really an interactive dialogue. Both sent their regards. And I will also maybe in the panel also, I had talks with them before. I will share some reflections that they posted me before, so they also sent their regards. And they're with us maybe also watching. So far so good. Setting the scene, part one, try to keep it a bit short, but still I felt many may be aware of some of the facts, just a general and brief recap on aging population trends. By 2030, 60 plus population increases from 1 billion in 22 2020 to 1.4 billion. That means also 1 in 6 people worldwide will be aged 60 or over. And if we move on to 2050, population aged 60 plus doubles to 2.1 billion. And at the same time, I think obviously this even has a more substantial implication when we also take this into relation to the birth rates, declining birth rates, the fertility, which on average, globally speaking, falls down to 2.1 birth per woman. Obviously, we know that's an average globally, that high-income countries, developed economies have even made lower birth rates in the future. So that overall obviously makes it very clear there is a huge gap emerging between the young and the older generation, and we need to start today and not tomorrow even to talk about this more explicitly. Some of the major challenges, again as a recap, because I think it sets nicely the scene also for some topics and angles. On the one hand, it's also often related to a policy discourse. I'm not so much talking now about scientific academic discourse, but policy discourse raises usually 2 things when it comes to the social aspects and health aspects. Healthcare burden, there is an increasing demand for elderly healthcare and also more long-term care. At the same time, it's not only about healthcare, but also about social inclusion, about fostering social embeddedness of the older population. And that can relate to new infrastructures, to public spaces, housing, and so on. Those are the two major aspects that fall under, we could say, the social and healthcare aspects. And then on the other side, we talk about financial and economics. That means financial strain. Obviously, the expectation is that there are fewer and fewer working age contributors. That means there are fewer people that are below the retirement age that will contribute to the pension system and social security systems. Also, there is another argument in the policy discourse that companies face issues of the older workforce face difficulties in keeping up with the fast pace that certain technology-driven companies have, and also to adapt with new systems in companies that are at place, and that's where technology comes in. So these are also the question, how to maintain economic productivity, at the same time being very inclusive towards elderly workforce. Some of the strategies globally that are discussed, I mean the World Health Organization, the UN agencies, nation states, all stakeholders involved in that areas, there is an action plan emerging. They talk about these 4 action areas, which reflect a little bit the initial themes I just talked about. But these 4 action areas are quite crucial also for our discussion later on, because there are different angles. On the one hand, it's about delivering a care that is responsive to the elderly, providing also access to long-term care. So that's more on focus on the care, offering new solutions. That's where entrepreneurship also can come in, offering new solutions to improve our healthcare services. But at the same time, and that links more again to work, to the financial economic aspects and work in the future, that we start changing how we think about age and aging. For instance, in policy discourse, there's more and more the notion of active aging, which also relates to a dynamic workforce even at an older age. At the same time, it's important that we ensure that communities and organizations are also aware and find better ways to make use of the abilities and skills and knowledge that experienced employees, senior employees have. That's an interesting quote, which I found was interesting. I also saw that recently, kind of a quick reminder in terms of also why we need innovative solutions as well, even in Finland, that it seems like on average that is spending less on elderly care and special healthcare than other EU countries, or it's below the EU average. And I think that's quite an interesting, was also for me, I mean, to see, okay, that's really the case. And I think we can also discuss that more. I'm sure Sandra also has a lot to say there. why we actually need also entrepreneurial solutions to have a better healthcare system that is also especially responsive to the elderly population. So now, why we should also mix entrepreneurship into this whole debate and the challenges. Why is entrepreneurship so important that entrepreneurship really has something to say here? Because when you look at it, there are logical argumentations for it. For instance, the active aging agenda and improving well-being and prolonging working careers. So a logic, if you want to prolong working careers, even beyond retirement age, which is, I think, very high on the agenda in the political discourse, should we even extend the retirement age? Or how we can motivate people to work longer than their official retirement age? And obviously, that's where entrepreneurship comes in or jumps in. Beyond retirement age, entrepreneurship or becoming self-employed, starting your own business, is one of the solutions that has been discussed already 15, 20 years ago, that this is a way actually how people can stay longer and active in the labor market. But at that time, we didn't know, is this really something we want? Do we want to work for long? Is this something we should promote even? It was a bit of on the edge. Is this actually something we want? And do we want to encourage that even? But the main argument usually is, obviously, yeah, we want to use the experience, we want to use the human, social, financial capital that experienced employees have gained or experienced workers have, that this stays in the labor market and even beyond retirement age. At the same time also, entrepreneurship came more and more in terms of what we just saw also with the quote. There are certain limitations. There are problems also that different countries face when it comes to providing a sustainable, a sufficient healthcare offering for citizens, especially also for the elderly. That's where also entrepreneurship has been more and more discussed. Linked to that, one of the suggestions also by policymakers, already 15 years ago, 10 years ago, more and more, actually, we should also talk about late career entrepreneurship. We should also talk about late career founders, because we need them, they have skills, they have the knowledge, they have experience. Why we should not encourage that also people at an older age start their own business, engage in self-employed activities. Self-employment obviously is very common also when we talk about bridge employment. That's again something that is kind of fills the gap of a transition from work to retirement, so that the transition itself is actually a bit of slower. You stretch the time, which is often very important. So instead of an abrupt ending of your active working life, all of a sudden you're tired, and then. So the bridging employment idea is quite important when we think about entrepreneurship. It offers still a few years or even more to be active in the labor market. One of the other aspects why entrepreneurship has been increasingly actually seen as one of the options is, I'm not saying age discrimination, but age stereotypes are prevalent also in companies. There are some clear indications that cognitive abilities, certain abilities decline with age. That's what we know. But there is much more. There is much more to it that when we talk about soft skills, experience, and knowledge. But the opportunities for senior employees at companies, at some point we see it becomes more and more difficult, especially in certain industries, certain types of companies, for senior employees to really stay until retirement. This is maybe all over a nice rationale, and it seems like actually it really makes sense, and that's why I also understood back then, it makes sense that policymakers at least want to raise awareness of entrepreneurship in relation to addressing challenges when it comes to aging population. One of the facts, obviously, is that sounds also great in theory, but we know that startups for 50 plus is roughly half of that in the 20 to 49 age bracket in most of the OECD countries. So there's a huge decline. There's a huge decline of entrepreneurship startup rates, business startup rates with age. I thought this was now a bit of like Timo Korkeamäki, Maria Miniti, Thomas Wainwright, Robert Blackburn, Virva Salmivaara, Martin Nurman, and more. So I think it's fairly easy to say that I have been part of a pioneering team in pushing really this research agenda in entrepreneurship, where aging in entrepreneurship was not really an important topic 15 years ago. I will start a little bit more on, also at the same time, I will have 3 major topics on entrepreneurial entry decisions, on motivations and what influences that around age norms, moving then in also into well-being income implications when you start a business at an older age, and then going more into questioning also, does it make growing before? Is usually a simple argument. There's the feasibility argument versus desirability. On the one hand, yes, senior employees, senior workforce might be more skilled, more experienced, has more knowledge and more wealth, which is very important, more networks. Therefore, it could actually be more easier to start a business. So everything is in place a little bit. Why not starting? Obviously, then it comes to desirability. Why should I? Why should I do this? I have a great job. I have a great hobby. I'm now in the age of, let's say, 57 or 63. Why should I now really still start a business? I have a nice income. Why should I do this? So this is the usual argument, and that holds in many ways. But is it really so does it make sense to generalize? That's what we began to ask first, beyond the general understanding of why actually you want to even engage and think about starting your own business at the age of 50 plus. One of the first studies that helped a bit of unpack and saying, okay, first of all, let's not generalize. That's in general what we shouldn't do in entrepreneurship. I mean, there's so many different types, different ways of engaging in entrepreneurship. But just to show a very simple way of unpacking the differences, that already helped. Usually there is this typical inverse U-shape that we see in entrepreneurship and aging. That means that the startup rates, self-employment rates increase until the age of 40, 45, but then there is a dramatic shift. It decreases, which means after 45 plus 50, usually the rate of starting a business decreases dramatically. That's the usual typical understanding. But when you look at different types and distinguish between, for instance, self-employment rate, where individuals really wanted to do it, they had the vision, desire to really start a business and become self-employment, so-called also lifestyle entrepreneurs, then you see a very different line. Basically, that's where the self-employment rate actually increases. So we see basically the typical understanding of entrepreneurship. That's when we really talk about owner-managers or entrepreneurs who employ people, at least 1, 2, 3 or more people, that actually really start a business and are not only solo entrepreneurs. So that's where you see then actually the dramatic decline of the self-employment rate. And this was 2013-14, one of an important paper and study that shows actually we need to look deeper and better understand the different types of entrepreneurial activities to better understand the relationship between age and self-employment and entrepreneurship. But overall, it is also clear, late career entrepreneurship we talk mainly about self-employment activities. There is a smaller group that also really starts businesses that still grow and also employ people. Research also went on more. We also wanted to understand, okay, we knew a little bit more about motivations. Why? So the research here, we tried to push more the understanding, not just biological age, but let's move into subjective age, into sociological ideas, how norms and how your own age, actually how you perceive it, affects the decision. And that's what we show, which was our assumption. The younger you feel, the more ideal your age is perceived by yourself in terms of entrepreneurship, independent of biological age. And the more likely your closer local environment is actually also supporting and positive towards late career entrepreneurship, the more likely you're starting a business. And what is a very important additional finding, this related more also to qualitative research in 2014-15, where we zoomed into more and more into the role of mentoring. Also those who find a suitable often very experienced mentor that was able to help an experienced worker to start his or her own business, that was also one of the key indicators that they were really starting and developing a business that also survived for more than just a year or two. And that's also something we maybe can talk about, that what we also know is finding the right mentor at an old age is very difficult. I mean, we know, I mean, if, let's say you have been working 35, 40 years in a company, even in a leading position, and you decide to start a business, and all of a sudden you try to get mentorship, but you already have experienced so much and you know so much, who can help you really in this? So it's very important to find very specific support for something very specific, so that also there is a good relationship, that it doesn't matter if someone is 28, 37, can still help someone with so much experience on something very specific. But it needs to be specific, what we found out. It can't just be a general advice. So it needs to be very targeted. And that's where I also could maybe cite and quote Lauri Rattia. I was talking with him last week, and he also mentioned that he's currently actually having some support from a younger mentor when it comes to digitalization, to some digital systems, and he found that really useful. But it also shows he knew what he needs, and where also someone from a younger generation can really help. At the same time, obviously, we found also many cases where experienced workers actually even found a more experienced worker or founder that could help. So that's an interesting tension actually, but it's very important to understand it's not so easy in general, I think, for every one of us to find a mentor for your life, but also if you want to find a mentor for starting a business after you have experienced already quite a lot. We then wanted to better understand even, is age discrimination an issue? Yes, I mean, that's something actually that we try to work on and better understand what are the mechanisms. Do late career entrepreneurs really face age discrimination? Different groups of entrepreneurs experience different ways of age discrimination, especially in closer social environments, meaning family, friends, clients, and so on. And this is just a quote. This is an extreme case, but still I want to show that this is also, it can be a serious matter. When your own family is saying what you're doing doesn't make any sense. And I can also quickly read it, but cold water has been thrown over me from my children, from all relatives, all family, children, everybody. I'm left alone, nobody wants to know what I'm doing, so it's cold water on me all the time, no help from nobody, because I intend to be different. And this is also something where we zoomed in, especially into partners, family, friends, relatives. That's where actually the first instances come. That's where you get the feedback, right, when you want to make a decision. And here we talk also, I remember that I was talking to us in London, this study where we talked to someone who was 40 years in a leading position in NHS, and out of a sudden really wanted to start her own social enterprise. And it was very uncertain. Does she get an income? How can she really, so nobody really understood how you can give up a great career, a great corporate career for starting your own business. We come to that also in a moment, why actually also still you would like to do that independent whether your income decreases or not. We tried obviously to find answers. It's not only that, yes, there is age discrimination, because we see that probably everywhere, in every part of our life spheres. But we came up, okay, there are 4 main strategies that late career entrepreneurs can use that experience age stereotypes in their closer social environment, or when they have an interaction with clients. Active negotiation and passive negotiation is very simple. Active negotiation is those who are really able to actively convince their partner, their friends, their relatives on a regular basis. They really work on it. They really try to convince. They really try to pitch almost, let's say, every day, hey, what I'm doing is good. You need to be patient, believe in that idea. I want to do now something really I believe in. And I still want to give up. Now, even though I was 30 years working as a doctor or nurse, I still want now to do something different that really fulfills me. And I want to work for it, and I want to convince you every day. So we had this active negotiation that was at play. Passive negotiation is basically you don't talk much, you don't talk, you walk. and others observe you, how gradually you maybe become successful in actually your business. At some point, you make an income, and this is the first evidence, hey, actually this is working. And we also had a few instances that tried to avoid convincing anyone. They just moved on and tried to convince by showing that this actually works and also generates an income. Modification avoidance are more dramatic kind of solutions, which modification means actually, if you don't get the support from your friend, you change your friend, you change your circle of friends. This is also, and this is, yeah, we can. It sounds funny, but actually it's quite dramatic stories. So it actually means long friendships, you know, also ended, because if someone really decides, I want to now do something I really believe in, some actually said, okay, that if then that's also how you maybe modify your network, your friendship circles. Avoidance means lots of businesses were created that we saw where you don't have lots of interaction with clients, for instance. You do online services, or you work in certain areas where you are not always, and that was especially when we secretary service, for instance, for women at the age of plus 60, they often felt it's easier for them to hide that their client doesn't know their age. So they really tried to hide them. This is obviously an issue we wanted to bring up also, and I hope that what also where research can help. This is a serious problem. This shouldn't be happening in our society, that you need to hide your age when you engage in self-employment activities. We then also wanted to better understand, that was now 2017, 2018. So far we better understood, okay, why it makes sense, or why people maybe make the decision to start a business at an old age, but also what problems they experience in terms of age stereotypes. Is also, does it really make sense to start a business? What are the implications of starting a business? And one of the aspects we really wanted to better understand is what are the implications towards income and quality of life in general. And this finding, basically what we have here, where we show that switching and leaving a full-time job to start your own business increases your quality of life more than staying in your current full-time job, or more than switching between corporate jobs. And that's why I think this was, at that time, the most important finding for advancing late career entrepreneurship is something, hey, it's not only just a way or an option out of unemployment. It's not only a story that people might have to do certain things. There's much more to it. Even though your income slightly decreases, this is what we also openly show, your quality of life can increase substantially. And I think this was a breakthrough 5-6 years ago in terms of lifting the notion of starting a business at an old age. Is much more. It can be also very opportunity driven. It's good, can be good for your life overall, even if you need to accept maybe a smaller decrease of your income. And this was finding, that's why it was also published in Harvard Business Review, because they also felt this is the first ever evidence that shows such a story. We then also wanted to move on and ask how late career entrepreneurship relates to retirement intentions. Does actually really a switch to entrepreneurship, if you switch from a secure full-time job to start your own business, does it also really strengthen your intention to work for longer? Yes, that's what we show. On average, might be something we could have already assumed, but what we try to unpack is really why they also really want to work for longer. And that's where we also related this finding previously. It is of quality of life is something we felt is one of the main explanations. Why should I really also work beyond the retirement age? What are the factors? And quality of life, including different dimensions, and we can talk about that later a bit more, what it means quality of life. And here we also could show that actually, for instance, one component of quality of life means that you are free enough to realize your dreams, your desires in the present, and also that you have a feeling in the upcoming years you have opportunities at play that you really would like to work towards that help you realize your own dreams, still at an age of 60, 70, or even beyond. At the same time, but also, and that's a bit of something we maybe need to discuss, but at the same time also we show that the effect of self-realization opportunities, for instance, as one component of quality of life, this effect disappears after 2 years. So in a way, what I presented here, what could argue, we almost challenged our finding that we published a few years before. Because in a way, in the subsequent study, we show the effect is short-lived. That means after 2 years, you don't see a strong effect anymore of transitioning to self-employment on your quality of life. It goes back to the original level. That was very disappointing, actually. But it is something to talk about, because still what we find, even though the quality of life maybe moves back to the same level as before starting a business, people still want to work longer. Why? That's an interesting question where we are at the moment also interested, okay, how to better understand beyond quality of life, beyond certain measures maybe we could assume before. What explains that still prolonging working career through entrepreneurship this still holds, and it's still what we see. Final big question is, and I mentioned that already, moving from income implications, quality of life, we want to even go one step further. How does late career entrepreneurship relate to innovation activities, different types of innovation activities? Simply, our main insight is late career entrepreneurs are more likely to introduce radical innovations than younger entrepreneurs. And again, this is, I would see, the next groundbreaking insight after the quality of life finding. So now we move not only from quality of life implications, there are some benefits, even though income decreases a little bit, but there are much more broader societal implications, because when we talk about radical innovations, new offerings, new products, new services that enter the market, not only process innovations, that's where young entrepreneurs are more likely to engage, which means maybe introducing a new novel system to cut costs, but it's not per se a completely new service that can change markets. We also explored more, what is the group actually? It's not only all late career entrepreneurs, as you remember when I mentioned that's a starting point. There are a few who really start a business that also employ people, where they invest in it and also where they grow. And exactly there is a group that we identified. It's those entrepreneurs with an orientation to innovate, obviously, but also there are two major factors. One is they're wealthy, and they have huge and long time managerial experience, not entrepreneurial experience. And I think that's a very interesting, maybe that's also something really to discuss more in detail. So it's exactly, let's say, those who are 35 years in leading positions, in large companies, they have generated wealth and network, have an orientation to innovate. When this group decides to start a business, then we talk about really radical innovations that can make a change in markets and society. And that's, again, I would say, has been also in the news all over. It's also, again, I would say, after the quality of life insight, the next step in late career entrepreneurship research, actually there's even much more than, as we said, not only a way out of unemployment, it's not only a way to bridge employment as a lifestyle entrepreneur. It also improves your quality of life, and it actually also can help boost innovations in our society. So some of the takeaways to wrap up, because it's time to discuss more and go deeper. It is important to build awareness that, first of all, late career entrepreneurship is not a marginal phenomenon. It is also a phenomenon where we need to deal and we need to understand there are ageist barriers at play that need to be managed, that require support. It tends to be more likely to create social than economic benefits. That was more quality of life than income. It promotes longer working life. It still mainly reflects self-employment activities overall, but there is a certain group of late career entrepreneurs that really engage in radical and new to the market innovations. And we know it requires very personal support, because it's not the easiest to mentor very experienced founders. And overall, I would say, actually how I started with the policy discourse, it seems, yes, late career entrepreneurship at an old age, plus 50, plus 60, plus 70 even, is a topic that fits the active aging policy, and one should openly talk about that and find ways to support all the different forms that can emerge when we talk about entrepreneurship at an older age. At the same time, and now it's really time for part 3, probably the most exciting part now, but I'm really happy that I could share a few insights, because maybe that triggers also some of the ideas. Maybe it also we can talk about this in more detail now, but I also want to say now, I now presented a certain angle, which is late career entrepreneurship. That means starting a business, becoming self-employed at an older age. But there is much more to it. It's a certain angle. As we said, there is much more. Entrepreneurship is also important to offer new solutions to address elderly population in needs with, for instance, mental health issues and so on. So in a way, entrepreneurship on the one hand can be linked to people at an older age really starting their own business, engaging in entrepreneurial activities, but then again also entrepreneurship that is targeted at improving healthcare service, social support that is responsive to the older population and their needs. So I would now like to invite Elisa and Sandra to the stage. I will move to this chair. So thank you very much. I hope it was not too academic, but I felt it's good to set the scene a little bit and share some concrete insights. And now also we already discussed a little bit before. Elisa and Sandra, ask you to maybe have a short opening statement, short intro, and maybe 1 or 2 general reflections on the overall question, which is still, how can entrepreneurship enhance quality of life in an aging society? And then we zoom in into maybe a few more specific questions. I have quite a long list, but I would also hope that the audience jumps in and has a lot of questions. I will also then try to make sure that our online audience gets something to say. So I will maybe then mention it, and maybe thank you for your help. You then can let me know later whether there is a question actually emerging, and then we could also bring in 1 or 2 questions or even more from the online audience. So maybe Sandra, if you could start and share a bit of your general reflections on the general topic of today's seminar.
Yeah, thank you, Ewald. It's really great to be here today. All right, so hello everyone. My name is Sandra Lounamaa. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Gubbe. And at Gubbe, we are building the world's greatest elderly care company. So, yeah, let's go back where it all started. So it started from my family's own needs. My grandfather passed away, and we quickly knew with my mother that we need some outside help to take care of my grandmother. We then looked for different service providers, public home care, private companies, friend services. We tried them all, and we noticed that they all have the same issues. People were changing all the time. We never knew who would come, when they would come, and there wasn't any dialogue between the service providers. And then me and my mom were thinking, like, how come is it possible that there isn't a decent elderly care service available? Like, we're living in a country like Finland, and we would be even ready for pay for the service, but we couldn't find a good quality elderly care service. So that was the idea around like 15 years ago already. I have a commercial background. I love everything regarding to sales, marketing. I've started one company before Gubbe. Then through coincidence, I met with my better half, with my co-founding partner, Meri-Tuuli Laaksonen. She's an expert from this field, and quickly we made the decision of starting the company together. And I told her about my idea, and she was immediately like, hey, this is it, and it will be huge. And then back then, this was like 6 years ago, we then looked more deeply into the problem market, did some market studies, and we quickly noticed that aging population is a huge challenge. It's a huge challenge compared to climate change. And at the same time, we already know that we have a huge lack of nurses in all Western countries, so the equation does not work. Population is aging, lack of nurses, and it's only getting worse. So what our solution is to this huge problem is that we are building the good quality elderly care, which is provided by the same Gubbe helpers, and through our technology we are scaling it. So basically we are scaling traditional elderly home care. And what makes us special is that we have built ways on attracting mainly young adults outside the nursing industry. So we don't have the nurses, and we see like solutions like people are like, at the moment they are like bringing like hundreds of workforce from Philippines to educate them to become a nurse. And we're like, we have the solution right here in Finland. We have the workforce, we have the motivated people to work as a Gubbe helper in elderly care. We have our platform to give them all the needed education and onboarding to work in elderly care without no previous education in elderly care. So, yeah. This was a long monologue.
No, that's great. Is it also so that the Gubbe helpers, one could say they're also entrepreneurs or how is that?
Yeah. Okay. That's right. So we are employing all of our Gubbe helpers through these freelancer platforms. So basically all of the Gubbe helpers are light entrepreneurs. And we don't have any age limit. Everyone over 16 years old can apply to work as a Gubbe helper. The average age is 22, but we have a lot of like 50s and in their 60s Gubbe helpers doing the job. So what we have learned that this model, that they work as a light entrepreneurs, gives them the flexibility. We know the mega trends of like gig economic. People are not like doing job like working in one company for their whole life. People want to study, they want to do a part-time job while studying, and working as a Gubbe helper is answer to that. People these days want to find meaningful work, meaningful experience, so having your own elderly customers that you visit on a weekly, regular basis, you go there, you have the education that you can help them to go out for a walk, to do the home exercise, help clean the house, cook food, even help with more of a nursing needs of helping them to take the showers and so on. So with our solution, we are really solving the lack of nurses and finding the model of, for example, in the current home care model, we see that we could provide that with having 80% of Gubbe helper staff and then 20% of nurses, that then nurses can focus on what they know best, giving medicine and what they are like trained for, so they don't need to take the trashes out and take the elderly out for a walk. So I think, yeah.
Great, thank you. I mean, also it reminds me a little bit of one of the studies. Also what we did is that we found really, I mean, if social enterprises, or if you say if new businesses, new entrepreneurial solutions also need to emerge when there is really a gap and a serious problem. So that's why it is a very, there is always a tension, right? So the more entrepreneurship is needed, or social entrepreneurship, that also means it's a subtle critique, obviously towards the public or state. So that's an interesting debate in general, I guess. So, but it's great that there are startups like yours emerging that really help. And I was surprised that Finland is really so much below the EU average investing in elderly healthcare. So, yeah, Elisa, if you could also make an opening statement.
I have to say I'm a big fan of Gubbe, and I really love your growth story as well. So it's a great example of brave entrepreneurship coming from Finland. Yeah. Hey, hello all. My name is Elisa. My zodiac sign is Leo, but I don't feel as a strong leader. I'm usually described as a glue between people, and that's why I'm an entrepreneur at EX. I run a program called EX Journey. It's a leadership development program for corporate leaders. Actually, we challenge corporate leaders with a real startup case. 1 year long program. Our great corporate partners are giving their best key talents, their vice presidents, head of something, and we deploy them to support startup entrepreneurs for 1 year. And they learn a lot, both sides. So it's a learning platform that's in that way. We've been doing this now in Finland, and now expanding. Germany is especially our big market at the moment. But what I have learned from this work is that entrepreneurship is all about mindset. It's a mindset. It's all about having the courage, having the passion towards some topic, taking the ownership and responsibility to really make the shit done. It's not everybody can be entrepreneur, even in a huge corporation or in a school, and it's more like a mindset topic. And what I have also learned from our work is that we really have to empower people towards more entrepreneurial action and thinking, also before we are in this late career mode, when we really have to have all these entrepreneurs late in their career. Being a Gubbe very early in their career, or then having some activities during the career, even though having a strong, for example, corporate background. And also what I have learned is the power of diversity. Having these huge sustainability challenges, we really need more diverse groups, more diverse groups to think through these challenges, start businesses together, and be there together, having all this experience that these more experienced people have. We have to have that experience on the table. And why we are here, all in all, as a company, is that I saw there on the slide this headline that people over 50 years old are the radical innovators. And actually, my spouse, my co-founder, is the radical innovator here. And because his experience, and because his network, and also because all of his failures during his career, we have founded the company. We have found some globally unique, which nobody's doing. So let's discuss.
Great. Maybe if I still start with the question before we maybe open it up. Also, maybe Elisa, you also mentioned, when I looked at your activities, also you mentioned that you also try to really bring in also an entrepreneurial mindset in larger corporations. Mm-hmm. So you work also with people in leadership positions, with managers, and you say also you connect them with startups. That's also a way in the learning in the program. So and I assume there is a bit of this intergenerational aspect also involved. Can you maybe share some of your reflections there, how that work with larger corporations? Because now, reflecting on the work I presented at the end, which it got published a couple of months ago, so it's a very recent insight finding, at least for the research community, to see late career entrepreneurs can be radical innovators. And I think what you try to do is actually really foster that experience, also corporate entrepreneurship aspects, but also help managers or who have been in leading positions for many years also think more entrepreneurially.
Yes, and also having or value entrepreneurs inside the company and outside the company as well. But of course, it's a very transformational 1 year these leaders are having in the program. So they get to work with very outside their box. So it's a different industry startup they are helping and working with. First, they have to learn the business. It takes time. It's very challenging for many experienced people as well. And then really get to see how startup is working. But what are the biggest surprises or insights for the leaders is that, okay, these entrepreneurs are really making decisions pretty fast. They actually have to make the decisions because they have to focus and they have so few resources there in the company. So really, we have to make the decision today, not tomorrow. So speed is definitely something they are taking away. But also a lot of topics around collaboration, like I explained. So how to utilize networks. In a startup world, it's having few resources, you have to work with others, with other players. And that's a skill itself, which you can learn. But very often in a big corporation, you don't have to have that kind of a broad skill set there because you have all the functions, you have supporters there inside the company. And also this, okay, they will really respect entrepreneurs, and some of them might think that, okay, would entrepreneurship be something for me, maybe late career option or something for the retirement, as a retirement plan. Some of them are doing this, but also many of them are really valuing their monthly salary, that's for sure. Yeah.
Great, so it's also something, speed is an important topic also in general in entrepreneurship. I mean, speed, when it's about new startups and you try to grow as quick as possible and then sell also quite quickly or after 4 or 5 years. So that it's nice what you said, it's actually that more experienced workers can actually also take out the speed, and that actually helps them maybe to also take a step back and see more, okay, where to innovate more radically. It's also what we know, and that's interesting. That's also even gerontology or aging research shows that the older you get, the more pro-social you think, the more also you want to engage in more meaningful activities beyond financial returns and so on. So that's also an aspect to address where I think the speed also comes in. It's more about taking a step back, doing something meaningful, than rushing into the next opportunity. So I think that was a great example. As I said, I have lots of questions, but maybe one still to Sandra. Entrepreneurship in healthcare. I guess we also don't want to. We want to, as we said, we want to be positive, and we both said, yeah, there are lots of challenges. There are lots of gaps and problems, but it's also a way to work together, maybe even with public organizations and state organizations. I was wondering if you could say still a few things. At least from aging research, we know there's a huge difference and gap also between urban and rural areas. And I think Finland especially, I mean, it's huge. Yeah. Regions are often very disconnected, have their own. So it's the land size, when I compare it to my home country, I'm from Austria originally, land size compared to Finland is a huge difference, you know. And we have more people in Austria, but we are so much smaller. And even the mountains in between. So we are really tight. So the population density, and especially in rural regions in Finland, do you see from your experience in terms of problems there and how your work unfolds differently in these different areas, and what are the problems also different when it comes to healthcare for the elderly?
Yeah, for us, so we are operating nationwide in Sweden and in Finland at the moment. And in Finland, we're operating in like 120 cities, so all over Finland. And for us, it's not a problem. We've created processes of like finding the workforce even from the smallest cities. So. And well, we are operating in B2C, B2B, and public sector businesses. So 3 business units, and like no matter from where the customer comes from, in the end, our operations are always the same, of like finding the best Gubbe helper and matching them with the elderly customer. But like I see that even in the smallest cities and towns where the elderly people might live, there is also a need for work, for employment. So we have the ways to then spread the Gubbe word out there, and then we get the applicants, and then we can choose the best one and then match them with the local elderly person. So.
And in terms of problems and needs, you see any differences? I mean, we often talk about that loneliness, isolation, not only after COVID, but in general, often aging is linked to aspects like isolation.
Yeah.
Do you see are there any difference in terms of the needs also from the elderly population?
Yeah, we see a lot of that. That of course, like elderly people might be living still in the smaller cities, and their families has moved to a central area, so they are not living there. So that's why they have even bigger need for our service. So ordering our service to take care of their elderly loved one that they cannot visit on regular basis. So. But I love reading the greetings from the visit. So after every visit, the Gubbe helper writes a greetings to our app, what they did on the visit, how was the elderly person feeling, and then adding a photo to it. And that greeting is sent to the elderly person's family members to read the super nice greetings. And I also love to read them. And like it varies when customers are living like in northern Finland. They might be like spending their visit of like baking the Karelian pies and going to the wooden sauna and those sort of things that you see like, oh, that's so lovely, like because we're living here in Espoo in Helsinki, like. But the needs are the same. Like we all human people, we have the same needs. We want the real human to visit us. We want and we need a social connection. And what we have seen in the startup field, because like everyone knows that the market is huge, that there is a huge opportunity. But what we've seen that there is a lot of companies trying to solve this in a tech-only solution, like developing connection tools for elderly people, developing like a monitoring systems for beds and like these tech solutions. But what we believe is that no tech will ever replace a real human connection. But what we are doing is making those human-to-human, face-to-face visits as scalable as possible with technology.
Mm. It's a great day. I should also, or did I mention it? Probably didn't mention it. Today is the World's Mental Health Day, by the way. So, and I think that's also when Markus Raivio can't be here, but also mention also his work is around really mental health issues. And one of the major innovations, it comes down to creating a community for community.
True.
So that's about real interaction with people and not only tech solutions. So I think that's it's a great example. One of the questions still was interesting. I don't want to open up this public-private too much, but still, how much you need to engage also in the local councils? How much you need to also? What is the bureaucracy involved here? Is it mainly you offer the service, or do you always need to communicate with the regional councils? How much is this the local governments are also involved in your work? Is it actually more a collective effort, you would say, or is it just you provide something where there is a gap, or is it actually also a bit of more collaboration happens, which would be ideal, I guess?
Yeah, excellent question. So B2C customers can like whenever order our service, but we are talking a lot to the public municipalities, decision makers, elderly care directors, and they are like really struggling of like finding different ways to tackle this problem, and they really like our solution, but there is there is a bureaucracy that is stopping us in Finland for the public sector to buy our service. We have Avi and Valvira that is like really strict, even like obeying the law, even like too much. So that is kind of like at the moment what we are like working on with the decision makers to really get the hoitajamitoitus law in a way that it would allow our certified Gubbe helpers to work in elderly care, so that the public home care could use our workforce and also care homes could use our workforce, because we have tens of thousands of certified Gubbe helpers that are like so motivated and so ready to work, but when the bureaucracy problems are taken away, then the problem is solved and everyone wins in this solution.
Great. One quick question still, Elisa. I'm really interested, and I mentioned it already in my presentation. Also, I'm still curious about.
I think Sandra said earlier about entrepreneurship. You were explaining how good is the feeling when you're reading these greetings from Gubbe people, and I think entrepreneurship all about seeing the impact very firsthand, And that motivates many of us entrepreneurs very much. And that's why we love entrepreneurship, but also, of course, it's like a hell of a lot work. It's super terrible at times. So I think that this immediate feedback we can get from the customers, from the communities. So I'm just thinking that if our, let's say, main career seems like a prison or seems like this kind of a place you want to run away, it's not something I would hope for these people, and also not something which is good a foundation for starting something then late career. But I really believe that when in your career or in your careers, I really believe that we have many careers nowadays. When you feel that you are empowered, you are supported, you can do something new, something you can own something really that will give the motivation. Not sure if I answered your question, but
no, that's great.
Couple of
so that
insights.
explains the 9 minutes, or and he envisioned already his murky or modern retirement. He wants to be
and in Finland, very often, I mean, how the picture we have for retirement is that okay, we can have this cottage life there somewhere and have a very cozy life. But like, I mean, spending some time in the US, people really love the work. Very long careers there. So how do you feel? Why we have this? Are we working so much during our real career that we are exhausted?
I mean, that's what we also know, also from entrepreneurship psychology research. I mean, we know also that entrepreneurship can help and improve well-being, independent of age, over time, and but obviously, if you reach certain levels of exhaustion over a longer period of time, that obviously strengthens the intention to not work beyond retirement age and even stop earlier, or often are forced to take early retirement packages as well. So I think that's an interesting question as well. I think it's now probably still a good time already. Maybe if there are any questions from the audience, it would be nice to take in already a few questions to continue with our discussion. Anything? Yes, please.
The research that you completed and presented to us, was the research done only in Finland, or was it, more international audience that was interviewed, and where was that data collected from?
Thanks for the question. I mean, maybe one could say it should even be more Finland, but usually it's very mixed. So it's, I think, overall from the past 15 years, probably including 15 different countries, mainly Europe, but also US. And Australia. So basically all of the projects are these based on international collaborations, which is, I think, a good balance between the 1/3 takes place in Finland, but the rest also we always usually try to compare with other countries. Yeah.
Well, then a follow-up question. Were there differences between the different nations, different environments, different geographical areas in the results that you found?
Yeah, I think one of the recent ones I recently was during COVID crisis, for instance, where we tried to do really multi-country study to better understand how entrepreneurs at different age groups respond to the crisis. And there it was interesting to see, first of all, that across the different countries we had, for instance, Germany, Italy, UK, Sweden, and Finland, and that's where we found one general effect was across all countries and that was interesting, because actually I applied for funding and I got the funding for the argument that actually during COVID crisis, entrepreneurs at an older age are actually more the risk group and actually will be more difficult. But actually what we found, actually young entrepreneurs, much more exhausted, had much more problems in coping with the COVID crisis than older entrepreneurs. That was across all countries. But when we zoomed in more into fear aspects, into kind of doubt in terms of future, when we also then zoomed in more linked to war, for instance, not only COVID, but then we tried to better understand how does the distance to where crisis happens or war happens, for instance, because there was also an assumption that closer to your where war happens, the more likely you experience fear or anxiety or exhausted as an entrepreneur, because you deal with uncertainty all the time, even more. But that was interesting to see that in Finland was the lowest level, even though they were closest. And that was interesting, probably not so much of a surprise, but compared to UK, Germany, and Italy, fear and anxiety or exhaustion that was much higher when they related their entrepreneurial activities to what's happening in Ukraine. And that was an interesting finding where we saw that distance matters to explain differences, but even the opposite way, that the closer you are, the less actually you worry about that. That maybe explains, obviously, for instance, Finland has a long history, got more used to that, but so that was one difference, clear difference in anxiety and fear in terms of the entrepreneurial activities relating to a crisis like war.
Hi, my name is Mika Raulas, and thanks Ewald
Hey.
and the panelists for the discussion and the presentation. Now that we know that 50+ entrepreneurs are radical innovators, and if the number of 50+ startup founders is growing, I don't know whether that is happening, but if that would be the case, how do VC investors, venture capital investors respond to this trend, if it's a trend?
Well,
very good question.
We are not VC investors, but I've been talking to like over 500 VCs and we've like raised over 7 million of funding. So what my takeaway would be that VCs, so it's a lot of about the big discussions about like genders and how much female teams are getting funded. So although you have a good pitch and you have the good numbers and all those in place, still the VCs might make the final decision based on their mutu feelings of like how they've seen a successful entrepreneur before, and usually it's like a white male in their 30s or something. So that's why they might not say it like, no, we are not investing in you because of your age, but that is not a typical profile of like a successful entrepreneur. So that's why that's kind of like how I see it as a female founder.
Very good. Yeah. If I would be an investor, I would definitely look into if the founding team or the core team is it diverse enough. So having enough diversity in age, in gender, in all the aspects, we know research is showing us it's the best way for innovation, or best foundation for innovation. And I see very rarely very diverse teams. So usually they are, well, very often they are 2 male engineers in their 40s or 30s. But I would really like to see this trend also happening.
Yeah, really thanks for that great question
really
as well.
Yeah,
I think maybe just to add, one thing is that actually events like this hopefully also add to this. At the end of the day, it's about building the awareness more and more. This is what we know already and find. We need to make this more public. We need to talk about that. That also VCs maybe also understand better, are more alert towards a certain group that has been so far a bit of underexplored actually when it comes to VC
I think
investment.
it's a question of attitudes and experience of that as well, as you Elisa well put it. I'm a 60+ startup entrepreneur in the middle of a funding round, so I've heard.
Good luck.
Diversity is a thing that is appreciated if you present it well.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
And there is.
Is it your first funding round? No. No. So then you have better odds.
Well, first of all, thank you for the panel. I'm totally enjoying and it resonates with a lot of my thinking. I have a question to Sandra. I'm following Gubbe and I'm a big admirer of your company. So I'm really fascinated with your solution and how you tackle issues like loneliness and taking care of elderly needs. However, I see another thing is, which is outsourcing caring So it's much easier to pay through the Gubbe's service and find the helper than, for instance, travel these 3-4 hours to see your old parent. So does it actually create another issue of disconnecting family links, and what would be your reflection on that? So whom are you actually serving, those elderly people or actually their kids who are probably a bit lazy to go and do that work themselves?
Thank you for a great question, and like that is people are asking that quite a lot. I don't see that those are like you don't compete with our service as a family member. I believe that because you love your elderly person, you want to take the best care of his or her, and then of course, like what better you could do than ordering our service for them and taking better care of them. And then when you are visiting them, then you know that they are feeling even better after you have ordered the service for them. And then maybe you have more time to just be together than you don't need to like start cleaning when you go there like once in a month.
Okay, here's another question. It also relates to that they often don't really want to leave their home region as well at a certain age, right? It also makes sure they can stay in their living environment,
Yeah, thank you, Ville Pellinen, and happy World's Mental Health Day, everyone. Actually, thank you for the great discussion, and it seems actually that regarding this awareness and attitudes question, that instead of trying to keep the elderly people kind of hanging on in the current business life or working life, we should kind of look more into what could the current business life learn from these more elderly entrepreneurs. So it seems, because you have been talking about meaningfulness and sense of belonging and more resilience and radical innovations. So you basically have said all these things, but could you all still summarize for the end that what would be the key takeaways that the rest of the, let's say, younger entrepreneurs, employees, businesses, the whole working life, what could we learn from these more elderly entrepreneurs, and how to change basically the whole paradigm of doing business and work?
Great question, very big question. I think one, maybe just because there are lots of, I think there's a lot, we need more time for that. It's a really big question. I think I only can say, I luckily got 2 weeks ago also again funding to do more research, which is good. And it's called around Senior Talent Management Project. And I bring in the entrepreneurship angle, obviously, and I think exactly where I ended. With this, I want to move on now to really build awareness, as you just said. Instead of talking about sometimes we talk about early retirement packages or retirement too early, or sometimes in the last 5 years before retirement age, certain they're not the positions anymore often for an aging workforce, but the skills and knowledge and experience to be used. I think one could really install maybe even programs like yours more earlier on in corporations to make even build the awareness from within, to, on the one hand, maybe help experienced workforce to think even about starting their own business on the side already and stay as self-employed, maybe even more active. They can still work for their company as a self-employed, but also expand their own activities to help other companies. And I think there is exactly now a way I want to zoom in more. And there is this time span of 5-10 years before retirement age. There needs to be much more than just saying, okay, we just wait until retirement age, and or even offer early retirement packages just to not openly talk about the real issues. So I think what you just said, that's something where I think it's about senior talents. We should talk more about that, senior talents, and also build the awareness among larger corporations to encourage now really entrepreneurship at the late career stage. Within the company still, but also beyond. That's a quick answer to that. Do you want to maybe still say something? Or?
I think that so I'm now 34, and being operating building Gubbe the last 5 years, it's been so rewarding, but at the same time it's been so draining. So I'm thinking how come could I start this company in my 50s, and I'm at the same time when you're young, you're I've been naive, like, yes, we are like doing this, but if I would have known back then, like, how much does it take to build a successful company, maybe I would not have started a company. So when you get older, you also get wiser, and you see, like, you understand the big picture, and you see the whole problematic. So it also, like...
But exactly, that's why we need to encourage, we need those entrepreneurs in our societies that really care for our society more, maybe than just having a quick, you know...
But then it's about the diversity, about having the
Exactly.
diverse team. You're having young people on board who have the energy, and then have the older people that have the knowledge.
Who can work part-time in the company and so on.
And that's actually one of the recent findings, also a study where we show really diversity helps that businesses not only grow quicker, but also are more sustainable in the long term. Diversity is one of the keys. And also what you mentioned was really important, and that was one of the things surprised me most. During COVID-19 crisis, it was so clear, I had a different assumption, because I said it's more the risky, vulnerable group are the elderly during COVID-19. It was all about, but it was the opposite. The most resilient were plus 50. Younger entrepreneurs really faced more issues, were more exhausted, had more issues when it comes to psychological issues and so on, and well-being. So the resilience aspect, what you said, in addition to taking a step back, being not too fast, there is a combination, I think, that is really a treasure, where I hope we talk much more about that. And that also might be something in our new educational offerings, that we build more an awareness of this particular group and niche. And I think there's so much, so thanks for the great question. You have still...
Definitely, yes.
Yes.
I really feel that what young people can learn from the experienced professionals is that how do they utilize their networks? How do they really work through people inside the companies, but also outside? I mean, of course, we both are very active on LinkedIn. We know how to use these social media channels, but it always surprises me how I can learn a lot from people who have been there before, and really how to work with people. So I want to observe that more even. But I'm also a fan of Jane Fonda. She's one of the great entrepreneurs, I would like to call, in her 80s still. Having been a climate activist, having her own shows and so on, and also showcasing that you can have different careers in your life. So right now I feel that I'm in the middle of my first career. Maybe something else will come up later on. And having this agility in mind, so that we can really be agile. It's not anymore like my father has been working in a paper mill for 40 years. I don't see that's the future for any of us. We have to be agile and think that always also think that the next career and keep that in mind.
Great, and I see also we have a question from the online audience.
Yes, so there's a few, but to pick one, we could take, this is for Gubbe. How could we help the public sector find innovative ways to provide services like Gubbe does? This question because there are many older people who cannot afford private services that, for example, Gubbe provides. Their income may be so low that they cannot even exploit, quotation marks, kotitalousvähennys.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I hope that there are many decision makers on the line listening this, but we are already operating, having cooperations with like 30 municipalities in Finland. So they are buying our service for their elderly people. They might be like elderly people that are already in home care and having our preventative service in addition. But definitely, as I said before, like we have the bigger solution of like solving the whole crisis in elderly care. So it needs a change in Finnish law and Valvira bureaucracy. So let's.
Great. Should we take on one more?
Yeah.
Thanks.
One more?
Yeah.
Okay. So how could we encourage young startup people to involve also seniors in their business? Very often it is young persons only, so wouldn't it be good to increase heterogeneity also?
Very good question. I think we already discussed a bit. That's something actually...
Recruiting them for advisors or board members, I would say. I have seen so many times that we have people who really wants to give back, like we call it. So board, advisor position would be a great way to start.
Mm-hmm.
Mm.
Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Any other questions still here? Yes, please. I think we still have maybe a few minutes, if that's okay.
I have a very quick question for Sandra. Thank you for the talk. I'm curious about the competition in this providing healthcare for elders, apart from this public sector. Mm-hmm. And I'm curious about your future expectation in terms of this healthcare for elders.
Mm. Yeah, about competition, I see that I think a competition in a way that every elderly care company is in a way our competitor, but none of them has really the ambition and ability to provide the service in a scaling way. So there is competition, but a lot of small companies.
And Gubbe is the best.
Yeah. And also, I'm a fan of EEX. We went to their program like in 2019.
So we have the best people in our community.
Yes.
All right. Thank you for the wonderful discussion, for the wonderful dialogue. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for sharing. I can see Timo is approaching. That's, yeah.
Yes, I want to thank the panelists also for very interesting discussion, and of course the audience both here and online for great questions. So we'll thank the online audience, and we'll invite the audience here for refreshments and more discussions. So thanks again.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you all.